is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hi, this is Don Showalter from USA Basketball, and you are listening to the Hoop Heads Podcast.
Hey Hoop Heads! Wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. We've had their partnership manager and training specialist Jefferson Mason and their marketing manager Nick Bartlett on the show in the past, and we couldn't be more excited about what they're doing for the game of basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market, and they truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Beyond efficient reps, Dr. Dish provides training expertise and versatility designed to develop complete players. The new Dr. Dish CT machine has further revolutionized basketball training with over 150 plus on-demand individual and team workouts from some of the best coaches and trainers in the game. These workouts include video instruction and combine game-like shooting drills with ball handling, conditioning, and agility drills. Along with workouts, the Dr. Dish training management system also provides stat tracking and analytics to track progress and ensure accountability. These are just a few reasons why top programs like Duke, North Carolina, Louisville, Florida, Baylor, and countless others are upgrading to Dr. Dish. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoop Heads podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Also, make sure to check out the new Dr. Dish Home Machine, which is perfect for these crazy times when gyms and schools are closed. Visit drdishbasketball.com for details. That's a great deal, Hoop Heads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
You have to maintain a certain minimum standard of attitude and work ethic to be a part of our program. In practice, we'll ask you to step out of the drill or potentially the entire practice if you don't maintain that effort or that attitude. Okay, so there's that minimum standard, there's that minimum threshold to be a part of the program. You have to meet that criteria. But after that, it's about who gives us the best chance to win.
JP Nerbun is the founder of Thrive on Challenge, a mentor, writer, coach, and sports consultant. A multi-sport athlete growing up, basketball was always his first love. He followed his passion to the University of South Carolina, where the Gamecocks won an NIT Championship in Madison Square Garden in 2006. After playing in college, JP moved to Ireland, where he earned his teaching degree in physical education and sports science at the University of Limerick, one of the top universities in Europe for sports education. Nerbun has coached over 12 years in Ireland, Lithuania, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania. During his time in Ireland, he has coached over 30 teams in 5 years. JP has been thrown into head coaching positions at nearly every level imaginable, including professional, collegiate, and high school, gaining an incredible level of experience, including experience with failure. Having worked with men and women at various levels, with diverse backgrounds, and across all sports, JP understands how to apply the principles, systems, and strategies to build a transformational culture. Since founding Thrive on Challenge, Nerbun has served coaches, athletes, and parents across the world at every level and in every sport. Make sure you subscribe to the Hoop Heads podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a 5-star rating and review. Believe it or not, those ratings help your friends and colleagues find the show. If you really love what you're hearing, recommend the Hoop Heads pod to someone and get them to join you as a part of Hoop Heads Nation. Have your pen and paper ready as you listen to this episode with JP Nerbun from Thrive on Challenge. Hello and welcome to the Hoop Heads podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here without my co-host Jason Sunkel this morning, but I am here with JP Nerbun from Thrive on Challenge. JP, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me, brother.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you on. I know there's going to be a lot of great things we're going to be able to talk about in terms of culture and leadership and ways that you are able to help and mentor coaches. So let's start out by going back in time, give people a perspective on kind of what your background is. Talk to me about how you got into the game of basketball when you were a kid. What made you fall in love with it?
Oh, man, got to put a lot of that on my dad. He just had a ball early in my hands and just, from the age of probably about 3, I identified myself as a basketball player. So I grew up watching Hoosiers films and The Pistol and all those movies, and loved the game. This is, before AAU days, and everybody was playing all the time. So I could honestly tell you the highlight of my year was every November when it would roll around, we got to start going to basketball practice. It was a great time.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people kind of in that age bracket, you think back to those times. And tell me about just you playing and being before the AAU system. So do you spend a lot of time playing pickup games and kind of playing on the playground, which I know that we've talked about it with other coaches, just kind of how that has disappeared to a large degree. Outdoor basketball just isn't around as much as it was. Did you find yourself playing a lot of pickup basketball on the playground when you were a kid?
Honestly, due to where I lived up until I was probably, in fifth grade, I kind of lived in just, a town, and there wasn't much of an areas for kids my age to play. And then we moved out in the country. So I didn't have like pickup, go walk down to, but it was kind of more like my mom would drop me off on a Saturday and I'd be in the gym there at the local community center just playing all day long. So loved that. And, I was fortunate enough that parents didn't believe in TV for most part. We'd watch like maybe one movie a week. And so it was read books for basketball. And I was definitely picking basketball over that. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of distractions out there that kind of keep kids from falling in love with a game that is obviously a beautiful game, a great game. And there's other things that are maybe easier to and more appealing because they require a little bit less energy, but also those things like social media and computer games. I mean, those things, they have been engineered to continuously bring people back to them, right? Whereas I don't think Naismith had that much intention when he developed basketball, right? So, but social media and all that, I mean, there's a lot of psychology in what they're doing behind that to get young people to consistently keep picking up their phone, keep getting back in the gaming system. So it's tough, it's tough, but when these people are using science and research to get kids engaged, I think as coaches, we should be using science and research to make sure we're keeping kids engaged as well too.
All right, so let's jump right to that. What are some strategies that you would share with coaches to try to make the game more addictive, make it similar to what you were just talking about in terms of gaming and social media?
Yeah, well, let's start with a kind of a broad thing. We can kind of narrow down just the most basic thing that we want to try to do is we want to try to tap into intrinsic motivation within the individual rather than using extrinsic motivation. There's a lot of research out there, a lot of books you can read. Probably the best book you can read around intrinsic motivation is Drive by Daniel Pink. Goes a lot, very, very deep into that of what it takes to build an intrinsically motivated environment, as well as the negative effects and the shortcomings of extrinsic motivators. Okay, so, but yeah, extrinsic motivation, the carrots and sticks approach that we so often use in sports, and this could be down to the way that we discipline, or it could be the way that we organize our practices. And, I've seen coaches, offering rewards or punishments or even just the way that we communicate. Okay. I could be trying to, obviously use a lot of carrots and the praise. And it's not to say that praise is bad, but sometimes when it just becomes, we try to use that as the motivator or motivational talks, inspirational speeches, YouTube videos. These things are all very extrinsic, as well as a negative approach to coaching when it's a lot of yelling, a lot of putting kids in line, making them run. These things would all be very extrinsic as well. But they're obviously commonplace in the way that we've been coached for so long. And they've been effective. And they still are, to a certain extent, effective. But as Pink talks about in his book, as a lot of the other research shows, and as our own experience knows, effective in the short term does not necessarily mean effective in the long term, right? So when it comes down to motivating my players, if I have to give them an inspirational or motivational talk, if I have to constantly be telling them good job and offering them that praise to work hard, to do the things that we want them to do, eventually that's going to get tiresome and it's going to wear out because we're going to have to continuously offer more and more and more. To get them to follow through on that stuff. The same with, kind of the negative, the sticks approach there. We keep having to raise the stakes. I think back to some of my practices where we would, have a competitive game and I'd offer, losers are going to run, and well, if I wanted to make it extra competitive, we're going to triple the running, right? Well, right. Don't we just want kids to show up and work hard, have a good attitude because that's who they want to be? And so how often do we sit down and help our players identify who they want to be, what team they want to be, and the process behind achieving that. And then when we start to do that, we tap into the first thing around autonomy and also helping them to realize that they have control over their results and their outcomes, and really putting them in the driver's seat. So, I mean, that's kind of a brief overview there on just kind of how you might start to set that stage there.
So what does that look like if I want to set up and get away from, I'm going to call it the old school method of coaching, where if this doesn't happen, we're running, or I'm constantly just having to throw more and more praise at kids. And on a day-to-day basis, on the ground, in a practice setting, or when I'm thinking about what my season's going to look like, I'm trying to plan out my entire year and what I want my team to look like, or maybe I'm just taking over a program. What would you recommend, or what do you see as a way that you can set up getting your kids to become more intrinsically motivated as opposed to extrinsically?
Yeah, and it's a great point, great question, and let's dive a little bit into that. So when it comes to that intrinsic motivation, first off, autonomy, mastery, and purpose are the three big drivers. So everything that we try to implement with programs, we use through the lens of, is this going to help drive intrinsic motivation? And are we tapping into those three areas? Well, we could start with the individual. Let's start with an individual, how I might help them tap into intrinsic motivation within an individual, because we can also expand that to the team level very easily. So one of the first things you want to do is to help them to establish a vision of who they want to be. And so that is, at this stage, for many basketball coaches of the year, at this stage of the year, to sit down with them and have a very, very powerful conversation, which I call closing the gap. Okay, closing the gap from where you are to where you want to be. Well, we got to start by having them at least say where they want to be, where they want to go. And so that starts with asking the question of, what are your aspirations for basketball? Or it could be a little bit smaller. What are your aspirations for next season? Or what do you want to get out of this off season? Or you can even go bigger. What do you want out of life? You want to, like, it's just, you can, depending on the level you're coaching at, whether you're at the collegiate level, high school level, or you're at the youth level, it could vary here. But you have to start with a vision of what those outcomes they want are. The next question you're going to ask them are, okay, if you want to achieve that, if you want to be a starter next year, or we'll use the example for this conversation of, you want to go play college basketball. All right, what do you need to be good at to achieve that, to become a college basketball player? How good do you have to be in these areas? So they may sit down, they identify a few things. You want to be a good shooter, I want to be fast, I want to be strong. Okay, how good though? What are some measurable type numbers that you might want to be able to put up out there and stuff? So you try to get into a little bit of the firmer details. And then after you've done that, so you've identified the outcomes or the vision that you want, you've talked about the skills that they need, then you're going to say the process. So what do you need to do to be good at those things? If you're a Division I, want to be a Division I basketball player, and you've got to become a really great three-point shooter that shoots over 40%, and you got great ball handling, you're fast, and you got this, what would the training regime, what would that look like? Will it be my nutrition, my diet, my sleep, be getting shots up? So you have them and you help them to identify that process. Okay, after you got that, then you come back to their habits. And you ask the very powerful question of all those things that you need to be doing, how much are you actually doing right now? That's and most guys, so it's like, okay, no, that's fine. All right. But what do you want to change? Do you want to change your aspirations? Do you want to change your goals, your dreams? Or do you want to change your habits? And most guys are saying, no, I want to change my habits, because nobody wants to be lazy. Nobody wants to be have a bad attitude, right? Nobody wants any of those things. Nobody wants to be weak. Nobody wants to be a bad shooter. Right? People want to be hard workers. They want to be successful. And so then you come in with the support. And this part of the conversation is really about, okay, what's keeping you from doing those things? What are your obstacles in your path? Right? What's keeping you from doing those things? And having them articulate that. This comes back to research. If you type in WOOP, WOOP, Wish Outcome Obstacle Plan, from Gabrielle Oettingen out of NYU, I believe. She's done a lot of this, whoopmylife.org. There's lots of stuff out there you can look up there. But what's the obstacle? And then once they've articulated that, how can I help you overcome those obstacles? And this could be their environment they live in. They don't have healthy food. It could be they don't have easy access to a gym. It could be the video game system. It could be they are obsessed with sleep or their phone. Like there's so much stuff that you could dive into there. But you're offering support. This is where you're helping to be an advocate, not just sit back and wait for them to screw up, because everyone screws up. Everyone at the beginning of the year, every coach on this podcast probably made some sort of New Year's resolution or commitment or had some sort of aspiration. And we all at April, we're in the middle of April here, have fallen short in some way. But we don't need people to sit there and yell at us or hold us accountable. We just need people to be like, okay, that's all right. You screwed up. How can I help you through that process? So that's kind of helping to get them to establish a vision and then have them make some commitments to that. You might walk away from that meeting or conversation with them having 1-3 commitments. Now, take that whole structure and you can apply that to a team meeting at this stage on a Zoom call with your team, or if we ever get back to normal here,
right?
You might be able to
Exactly.
sit down with your team and do this exact same conversation.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I think that one of the things that I get out of that from hearing you talk is the fact that you're diving deeper into it. You're getting the player's opinion, you're getting their thoughts, and then once you have their thoughts, you're not just sitting and, as you said, nodding your head. You're saying, okay, what can I do to help you to remove those obstacles to get you to where you want to go? And then I'm assuming that after you have that initial conversation, then the next stage in the process is I've got to continue to engage that kid on whether it's a daily, a weekly basis throughout my season, throughout my off season of, hey, how's it going towards this goal that you had this season? And that's just, to me, that seems like a very simple way then to be able to continue to engage your players throughout the season, because you already have this base of a conversation that you can go back to.
100%. And I know many teams out there do set a vision or values and standards in the beginning of the season. But the problem is we do that as coaches so often, and then we just expect them to just deliver on it. And we don't, and so we just jump, and then we get frustrated, and then we start getting angry, and then we start to try to hold them accountable. And we miss that whole thing. After you've established that vision and standards, you've got to support that. You got to be a coach. You got to be a teacher. You got to be a mentor in that process. And so you touched on there a follow-up, coming back to, whether it be weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly conversations with that player, checking in. But when you come into that conversation, you're not there to call them out on it. You're there to call them up on it. Hey, I know you're struggling. That's okay. What can you do to improve on those things? What are the obstacles? What's still keeping you from doing that? And coming at it from a place of support, but also supporting them in the session, supporting them in your practice, supporting them in your training. When you come at it from that standpoint of, this could be if you're, in a practice with, we'll go back to the individual, pulling the individual aside, and your assistant coach, some coaches go, I don't have all that time. That's debatable, but your assistant coach is also being trained up in this, to pull the guys aside and say, hey man, what's your effort at right now? Scale 1 to 5. Most kids are going to be honest with you. And then, 2, 3. Okay, that's all right. What can you do to take it to that 5? Because I know you're a 5. I believe in you. You're a 5. You can go 5 out of 5 on your effort. I've seen it before. And so they identify those 1 or 2 things. Say, all right, let's go. Get back in there. And what you're doing there is you keep coming back to, you're giving them the autonomy, giving them the choice to raise their level of effort. You're just helping them to become aware, using questions. We talk about leading with questions. Lead with questions. Use way more questions than answers. And we're leading with questions to get them to self-reflect and then to self-correct. And when we do that, this comes back to also the science of the brain, which I'm not going to go too deep in, but we're not activating the limbic system in a massive way, which the limbic systems are fight or flight response system, which is the lower part of our brain. We want to engage the upper part of the brain, which is the higher, more cognitive thinking. We want these whole-brained athletes. And so if we come in there and our body language and our tone is communicating support, that's less likely to be triggered. And we're much more likely to get through to that athlete if we can support in those type of ways.
Yeah, I love the idea of coaching with questions. I think that's something that just my own personal transformation, probably that's something within the last, I would say, 7 or 8 years that as I got more familiar with the idea of coaching with questions and just how important it is to help to trigger a kid's learning. And as you said, not to invoke that flight or flight response. I think questioning for coaches out there, the more questions you can ask in the course of a practice, and the more the kids can figure that stuff out for themselves. And then, as we talked about right off the top, then they're taking ownership in it. Then there's that autonomy of being in control of your own learning. I think that's a big, huge piece of what's important. And then my follow-up question to what you were talking about there is, I'm guessing that when we talk about these follow-up conversations, that you would probably recommend a combination of what you described a minute ago, which is during practice, I call the kid over and I say, hey, what about X, Y, or Z that we talked about before? Where are you on that? All right, let's see if you can pick it up to that 5 level, combined with, I'm guessing you'd probably recommend having a more formal conversation at different points during the season where you call the kid into the coach's office and you sit down and you revisit that original first conversation. So is that accurate in terms of having sort of it done informally and then revisiting it formally as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're hitting on a big piece, that this is not just done in one way. You know, it's conversations in the court when something has become unacceptable within that session at a point that you have to address it right then and there. And knowing when it is you address in the session and when you address it outside of that, that's a bit of the art to coaching. Okay, so there's a bit of an art to this. There's one-on-one conversations that you can have with your players. There's evaluation processes. We love to use Google Forms, the programs I work with, sending them out, self-reflection once a month on the standards that they've set as a program, but everyone reflects themselves. Then another one is a peer reflection, creating peer reflection sheets where everyone reflects and ranks each other based upon those standards. That honest peer feedback can be very enlightening for many individuals. And obviously you have some of the coach reflection that you might share with them from time to time, but there's a lot of different processes and helping them to self-reflect and self-correct within those standards, you know. And I think one of the biggest things I'd also encourage is we can do this. We can use this recipe that I'm trying to present, you know, to coaches, but the way that we do it is so important, and why we're doing it is really, really important. You know, and how we do it, we have to have, you know, body language and tone have to be right. You know, just because you say the words right doesn't make it going to be effective. Body language and tone have to be right, as well as, you know, the why we're doing it. Why are we doing this? Are we doing this as some sort of Jedi mind trick to get our kids to do what we want them to do? Because if we are, we're not being transformational in our coaching. We're being very transactional because we're just using this as some sort of ploy or trick to get what I want. We need to do it because bottom line is, this is going to help build character. You know, we talk about character and leadership, and we talk about so much stuff out there that's good stuff, but it's all classroom based. It's all lectures. It's not really helping players take control of their life and develop healthy habits. And we're doing this approach because it's going to help build character. And secondly, it's going to have a much better chance of you maintaining a healthy relationship with that athlete.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's one of the things that has clearly changed in the coaching profession, and not that there wasn't coaches 25, 30 years ago who were concerned with building character and creating leaders and doing all those things that you just talked about. But I would say for sure today in the year 2020 that is a much more common topic. It is something that a lot more coaches are striving for, is to not only be able to build a better basketball player, but also to be able to ultimately build a better person. I think, you know, we've had coaches on here that we've, you know, dove deep into X's and O's, and we've talked about program building and looked at it from a basketball perspective. But ultimately, what I found is when you talk to good coaches, no matter how excited they are about the basketball piece of it and digging in and watching film and figuring out how to beat an opponent and how to develop the skill of their players, ultimately it always comes back to, I want to love my kids and I want to be able to help them to not just be better players, but I want to help them be better people. And I think that that's something that when I look through and heard you speak before at the virtual coaches clinic and then looking through your Thrive on Challenge website, it just, that comes across so clearly that that's what you're trying to help coaches to do, is not only help their product on the court, but you're trying to help them to help their kids be better people. And to me, that's so, so important.
Well, and I work with coaches, you know, and they've gone through really successful seasons, you know, nearly undefeated, to coaches that have had a couple of wins in the last year or two. And I honestly don't see a direct correlation between the winning and the fulfillment. It doesn't mean that it's obviously harder to have an enjoyable season when you're 2-20 than when you're 20-2. But there's still a lot of challenges that come with 20-2. And what's fulfilling is the relationships piece. What's fulfilling is the growth that you see. And this is not easy stuff. I think, and it's not soft. It's really tough to be a coach that puts character first, that puts the person first, that is a selfless coach, that's in control of their emotions, than it is just to be that hard-nosed, always reacting, putting the wins first. It's so hard to maintain perspective in today's day and age, because the pressure, the spotlight, the social media, it's harder than ever to maintain that perspective of what's really important. And it's harder than ever for us to maintain our composure, I think, in so many instances, to do things the right way as a coach, just because of sometimes how we can actually get a lot of buys in some of these older transactional ways. I think people are craving, or they think that they're craving, they're wanting the old, that the coaches that get on their case and yell on them and do a lot of those transactional type behaviors. Because people in sports today, they see it as a transaction. Parents are looking for what you're going to do for them, as far as get their kid to the next level. Kids are looking for how you're going to help them. And if you don't give them what they're looking for, then they'll go someplace else. And so everything around sports has become very, very transactional. So, if you can get the wins, that's fine. Doesn't matter how you do it. If my son can shoot better, or my daughter she's a better player at the end of the day, that's fine. We just want the return on our investment of showing up.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think that ultimately there's at least to some degree a disconnect between what we're talking about here in terms of developing the character of our players and having it be about more than just the game, and the way that, unfortunately, in most cases, coaches are still judged to a large degree by what is their one-loss record. If I've put together 4 or 5 3-win seasons in a row, my kids may have the greatest character in the world, and I may be doing a lot of the things that we would want a coach to do for our own child, and yet we know that our athletic department, our administration may end up judging us on that one-loss record. So I think what has to be connected here is the fact that the things that we're talking about are things that not only impact character, but I do think that they impact winning and losing. They impact the product that you put on the floor. If you can get everybody on the same page and your kids know that you care about them as a human being, that eventually translates into improved performance. Head Start Basketball, along with members of the J. Billis Skills Camp staff, will be hosting the very first Prime Skills Camp, an affiliate of the J. Billis Skills Camp that is held annually in Charlotte, North Carolina. Prime Skills Camp will take place on the campus of Western Reserve Academy, just outside of Cleveland, Ohio, June 26th through the 28th, and will be designed for boys rising to grades 6 through 9. Prime Skills Camp will mirror the J. Billis Skills Camp in daily programming, teaching, coach-to-camper ratio, and quality of instruction. Prime Skills Camp brings all of the team-oriented individual instruction, focus on the fundamentals, and high-level coaching to young men aspiring to a high school varsity basketball experience. This camp is operated by Billis Camp veterans and includes the J. Billis Coaches Development Program alongside the camp, ensuring that the quality of teaching and coaching at this camp is second to none. Please visit headstartbasketball.com or jbilliscamp.com for more information or to get registered. I want to just put together a scenario, and I think it'll allow you to talk about some of the things that you have a lot of expertise in. And so let's imagine that I'm a high school basketball coach, and I'm coming in and I'm going to take over a program that has consistently lost for the last several years. And now obviously you're not going to know all the specifics, and we could get into a whole bunch of reasons why that is. But just in general, if I'm a high school coach and I'm taking over a program that has had a toxic culture and that hasn't been winning out on the floor, what are some things that you would do if you stepped into that position? What are the first 1, 2, 3 things that you might do just as a general rule? What are some things that a coach might do in that situation?
Hope that I get more talented players.
there you go.
And
there you
I
go.
think you have to say, like, I just want to preface my answer here with, you got to have, talented ball players to win games.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that.
One thing that I get frustrated a little bit with is coaches go, well, that character stuff's great, but bottom line is I'm going to win basketball games. Well, if you haven't gone over 500 the last 5 years, if you have been doing things the right way and treating your players well and having good relationships and holding them to a really high standard day in and day out, it's not because you've been trying to build character and doing things the right way. It's just because you probably don't have the players to do that, And I think that's an important thing to mention here. But when it comes down to, if you're going to start a program, great culture, bad culture, the first thing I'm going to come in there is I'm going to come in and ask. I'm going to start with questions. I'm going to meet with every player in that program. I'm going to meet with parents if it's a high school program. I'm going to meet with teachers in the building. I'm going to meet with anyone that has been associated, alumni. I'm going to get alumni together. What's been going well? What are we doing well here? Or to the players, what do you enjoy about this program? And then that's the first question I'm going to ask. Because I want to start with a positive here, especially if it's a real negative culture. You don't want to come in there being like, oh, I'm here to save the day, right? We don't ever want to position ourselves with our team as the hero. That's not our role as a coach, okay? We're not the hero to come in there and save the program. A lot of coaches want to position themselves in that way, and they're setting themselves up for some failure there. It's not a good marketing strategy, too, in business. So you're not going to position yourself as the hero, okay? So you come in with questions. What's going on? What do you enjoy about this place? And you want to gather as much information as you can. And then second, you say, okay, what hasn't worked? What don't you enjoy about playing for this program? You want to get, after you've started with that positive, then you can start to get some of their feedback on, and that's a real powerful question. The next thing you want to ask is, what are we going to do differently? Or if you're the head coach, what would you have done differently? Or what would you do differently now? Right, as rather than have done, because you don't ever want to put yourself in a position where you're bad-mouthing potential previous people. You might ask alumni, if you were taking over this program today, if you were me, what would you do right now? Okay, so you come with those questions, you get their suggestions. At the fundamental philosophy of this approach is, first off, you're tapping into intrinsic motivation. Once they feel autonomy, they feel in control, which is so important. And secondly, it links it back to, once these things start, these suggestions, you start to take on these suggestions, it'll connect to that purpose so that you've set out as a vision. But it comes back to the philosophy of Kaizen. Everyone's probably heard of Kaizen. It hangs in the Celtics weight room. It's that, small marginal gains improvement. One of the biggest misconceptions around Kaizen, though, is that it was, because it was implemented with Toyota. People think, it's probably the guys in the front office, constantly, hey, we're going to keep making things better. And they were sitting there making all these different adjustments. It was not the people in the front office that made the small incremental gains. It was the people in the front line. And Toyota's Kaizen philosophy was that any worker on that factory line could hit the red button, stop, and then make a change if they saw something that was going wrong. They took 100% of employees' suggestions. And their whole philosophy was, if someone makes a bad suggestion, someone else is going to come in there and make another suggestion to fix that bad one. And they let the employees drive it. And that's what's so powerful about the Kaizen approach. It's not coach-led, it's player-led. And they're out there, and the people out there, they'll have a better idea of some of the things that need to be changed than you can. You have to gather information. That'd be the first thing I would suggest for coaches.
Yeah, I love the idea of not coming in riding on your big white horse and saying, I'm going to come in and fix everything and wave this magic wand and make it better. And I think that advice of asking questions applies not just to coaching or business, as you said, but I think to just about anything in life. If you're coming into a situation where there have been problems in the past, how can you fix the problem until you know what the problems are? And clearly, if you're a coach coming into a new program, you haven't been in the practices, you haven't been in the meetings, you haven't been in the locker room, you don't know or understand what has gone on previously. And without that understanding, I don't think there's any way you can put together a really good, coherent plan that's going to make any sense until you know where the potholes are and where the obstacles are. And once you get that, then you can start to make that progress towards what you want to eventually get to. Go ahead.
No, yeah, I think that's a really important piece, because I see so many coaches, and I'm a vision guy, right? So I like have vision, and if I walked into a program tomorrow, I would have this vision that I would want to impart and get people to buy into. It doesn't mean we can't have that vision, but even in the worst cultures, if you're inheriting a really bad culture, you're inheriting the people of that culture in most situations, unless you clear house, right?
Right.
If you clean house, it's different. You're inheriting those problems, right? So you could tell them that here's a different vision, but everyone's still going to take some sort of maybe offense to that, right? There's going to be a little resistance. So, I think it's really important that we have that vision. It doesn't mean we can't share that with people, but our changes, we have to, I think the whole like blasting everything and starting from scratch, I'm not sure if that approach works in most situations. In fact, I've seen it fail in a lot of situations where it's coming in and saying, okay, we're going to make a few changes here and there, and helping them to drive that ship, I think is really important.
Yeah, I would guess that you would want to dial in and focus in on, okay, now I've diagnosed what the problems are, where the issues are, and it's kind of like coaching where you could watch 5 minutes of play and probably pick out 400 things that you want to fix, and you can't fix all 400 things all at once. So you kind of got to dial into what is the most important things I'm going to focus on. And I think once you have those answers by going through and talking to all the stakeholders, whether that's, again, parents, administration, former coaches, alumni, players, once you've got those answers, then you can start to, I would guess, prioritize 1 or 2 or 3 things maybe that you're like, okay, these are the first 3 things that I have to fix, because in my mind, they're the most important. And we may have to put these other things to the side to some degree to focus on what I think are going to be the most impactful changes that I can make.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the big question that you have to ask a coach is, do I want to come in and build relationships first, or do I want to establish my standards and my way of doing things? And I think so often I failed really poorly at this. In many programs over the years, I've had more failures than I've had success in these type of things, but that's where I've learned from a lot of them. And I've seen our coaches fail at this, but we prioritize the standards, and we're going to work hard, and this is our minimum standard of effort, without taking into account, first off, where they are, where their work ethic, where all that level is, because that's all relative. And where you pick, so you have to work with people, you have to meet people where they're at. But the big thing is, I obviously prioritize my standards and behaviors over the relationship. And I think it's really important that we never sacrifice a relationship over any one single behavior.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree that by building that relationship first, that enables you to eventually get to the point where you've built trust with, in this case, we're talking about the players. But if you've built trust with your players, now it allows you, I think, to push them a little harder, because they know the place that you're coming from. They know that it's coming from a place of love, a place of respect, a place of understanding about what that player is all about, and figuring out what buttons you need to push with that player to be able to give them that intrinsic motivation so that they want to be a part of what it is that you're building. And I think without the relationship, all that other vision stuff becomes a lot more difficult, because if the vision is only mine as the head coach and it's not the vision that's shared by everybody, it's really, really tough to row that boat if you're the only one rowing it in the one direction, and everybody else is just either sitting there or rowing the other direction. You got to have those relationships to get everybody to buy in initially. Yeah,
you just hit the big thing there. And if you look at effective feedback, let's just even talk about feedback, giving obviously hard feedback or instruction. There's extensive research in the business world around what makes effective feedback, and many people think it can be put together in a positive, negative, positive sandwich, and that they'll eat that, but there's actually no research that supports positive, negative, positive sandwiches being effective feedback. What is the number one criteria for someone listening to your feedback is relationship. You have to have relationship. So, you hit it right on the head there.
All right, so let's jump from that particular piece of it, and let's talk to an issue that lots and lots of coaches deal with, and I know it's something that you've written extensively about on your website, and that is the relationship between a coach and parents. So just talk a little bit about how you would go about building those relationships with parents so that you could get them on board to be a part of what you're trying to build as in your basketball program.
Yeah, and I think my perspective has really evolved rapidly over the last few years. I've been that coach that hates parents, runs from parents, sees the parents, heads the other way. I mean, I coach, there's times where I'd have my assistant coaches walk me to the car because I was afraid, not that I was going to get mugged or anything like that, but that parents were going to get up in my face and be really angry, and I just wanted to avoid those conversations. So I had my bodyguards, So I think a lot of coaches have done that. We've been the coach that, I don't even want to check my email after game day,
Absolutely. I think we've all been there.
I'll tell you a story. We were playing a game a few years back. 5 years ago. My daughter was just born. Okay, it was literally my wife went into labor 2 minutes before tip off. Obviously I missed the game.
Good work. That was a good move, JP. That was a good move in the long run.
So I wake up the next morning, after about 2 hours of sleep, and obviously it's my first child. It's a big day for me, and I get a call about lunchtime the next day, and at the hospital, just grabbing a little bit of food for my wife, and head back up to the room, and I get a call from a parent. I'm like, they're probably calling to congratulate. Yeah, that's fine. While I'm walking up the room, I'll grab it. Answer the phone. Parents like, Coach, congratulations. I'm like, oh, thanks so much. Literally within 10 seconds, the next thing they say is, well, I want to talk to you about blah, blah, blah's playing time from last night. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I just had a kid. I wasn't even there. I know, and I wasn't even there. It drove me crazy, and so I've had those moments where you're just like, are you kidding me? I preface this because my ask or my suggestion to coaches is a lot. And what I feel we have to do is we have to completely flip our perspective here, is seeing parents as this massive obstacle and start to see them potentially as an opportunity or asset to develop our culture. First things, parents are a part of our team culture. Whether we want them to be or not, they influence it. Their talk in the stands, their talk to their kid in the car ride home at the collegiate level, they're texting their kids, they're on the FaceTime to their kids, they are coaching their kids. And so they are really impacting our culture, and in so many ways in a negative way. And so we've got to try to flip that from a standpoint. If we want to drive a culture and drive buy-in to what we're trying to do, we got to bring them to the conversation. And secondly, from a transformational perspective, if I'm trying to make an impact in a kid's life, if I'm trying to help them, develop character and long-lasting habits, or even if I'm just trying to improve their performance, I want them to sleep right, get good sleep, and eat healthy, and show up on time. It helps if the parents are bought in on those things as well, So my approach is really to come out and try to build relationships with the parents. First off, to not see them as this obstacle, but see them as a person. Let's be honest, for us that are parents out there, it's a hard gig, right?
Absolutely.
And mine are young. I haven't even hit the teenage years. So gosh, help me when they're teenagers. So right at this stage, I'm like, some days if I'm to be totally vulnerable here, I'm just going, I'm a horrible dad. Like, my kids, they're yelling, they're screaming, they're rotten. I'm not developing character, or, I see snap at them, you're short on them. We have work, the stresses of work, the stresses of our marriage, the stresses of just life in general. And life is hard. Parenting is hard. And so we screw up as parents. And sometimes with the teenagers, the relationship at that stage is really damaged. It's distant. And there's a lot of insecurity with those parents. I think so many of our problems with parents, we say, oh, if they're unhappy, the kid must be unhappy. But the kid and the parent haven't even talked in like a year, had a real conversation. So, these parents, sometimes they're crazy. Sometimes they're just struggling. And there are, like I said, there are the crazy ones, right? And the crazy ones, there's about 5 to 10% in every program. And there's obviously, I don't have a lot of strategies for that, other than hopefully you have some good administration support. But the other ones that are struggling, connect with them on a human level, have conversations. You've got that means you have to have the courage to engage with them, talk, ask them about things other than basketball. So that would be the first kind of thing I would suggest, is really start to change our approach and see them as a potential asset.
All right, so let's say that you've built that relationship, which clearly anybody who's been in any type of profession dealing with kids, whether it's teaching or coaching, I think I learned this probably first as a teacher as opposed to a coach, is the more proactive you can be and the better relationship you can build with a parent before there are issues, problems, questions, the better off you're going to be, and the better that eventual conversation that might be a tougher conversation is going to go. If the first time a parent and I ever have a conversation is when their kid has a failing grade on their report card, or when their kid has a game where they don't play, and that's the first time that I've ever had more than a conversation of hello with the parent, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. But let's say we do get to the point where we've built a good relationship and now the parent comes to me with a question about my child's playing time. How, in your mind, how would you handle that type of conversation? What's the best way for a coach to answer that question of playing time? And I think we can guess based on what we talked about in terms of the conversation that you would have with a player, and you probably have a similar conversation with a parent. But just talk a little bit about what your approach might be in that situation.
Well, yeah, let's just circle back real quick to what you mentioned there, which was fantastic, which was we need to be connecting with them in the positive ways. And one of the ways that we can also do that, not just giving them an email or text when their son has done something or their daughter's done something negative, but I have coaches that I work with, and they got a reminder in their phone 3 times a week. Text a parent, or email a parent, or call a parent. And what they do in that moment is they say, who is exceptional in the last 24 hours? What did they do that was exceptional? Okay. Why do I love coaching this kid? They answer those 3 questions. They put it into a text and they send it to the parent. And they just say, hey, your son, your daughter, they did this. They've been great. I love coaching them because of this. Thank you for allowing me to coach your kid. That's game changer right there for you, because you're investing into it. Now you're in a better position when you go into this hard conversation. Okay. Now, the hard conversation, there's 3 steps to this that we really encourage coaches to have. The first is to listen, and how we listen is really, really, really stinking important. But the first thing you want to do in that conversation is listen. You want to ask questions. We talk about good questions that are not yes or no. They're not leading questions to have them tell you something that you want to hear. They're generally questions to understand, because you want them to paint and lay it all out there for you. Even if it's hard to hear, even if you think it's bogus and it's a bunch of bull crap, you want them to lay it out for you. So asking those open questions and asking them to expand upon any ideas that they bring in. If they think their son or daughter should be playing because over this, over some other players because they're a great 3-point shooter. Okay, tell me, why do you think they're such a great 3-point shooter? What are the type of statistic? Just asking lots of questions, but not in a condescending way, but just for them to be heard. 90% of parents just want to be heard. That's why they complain in the stands. That's why they complain in the car ride. That's why they go on Twitter and social media and blast you as a coach, because they just want to be heard. So just hearing them out, and at the end of that, once you think they're finished, go, okay, so what I'm hearing is this, recap that conversation and saying it, and just summarize the conversation. And hopefully they're at the end of it, but that's a real powerful strategy that Chris Voss, the FBI negotiator and the author of the book Never Split the Difference, talks about. That's rooted in brain science, and it's also rooted in the experience of the FBI and hostage negotiation. So this is how crazy things have become, Mike, that we're doing hostage negotiation tactics and parent conversations. But anyways, you listen first. That's the first step. The second step, and hopefully at this stage, what has happened is this emotional parent. They may appear to be emotional, or they may appear to not be emotional. They may seem calm, but underneath it all, this is an emotional conversation. If we try to have a conversation, a logical conversation with an irrational, emotional person, it's not going to go anywhere, is it? So hopefully we're talking to their rational mind, their upper part of their brain, right? And so now in this conversation, then you can say, okay, well, this is what we observe from our standpoint as coaches. First off, just to reiterate, this is how we determine playing time. We determine playing time based upon this. And hopefully you have communicated that at the beginning of the year or in the recruiting process of how you do that, because it's an important piece of the conversation. And so you really want to be able to communicate that clearly. Here's what I would say, two things that coaches fall, and I fall in these traps, right? That's why I'm so very cognizant of them. The two traps we fall into this point are we use judgmental phrases. And they're lazy, they don't work hard, they have a bad attitude. Get rid of all those things. Just say what you observe. In practice, when a coach corrects them, they say things like this. In practice, they are the last to finish drills. In games, they are not staying up cheering on their teammates. These are things that you observe, but also more so on the lines of the performance. When it comes to the three-point percentage, they are 22%. They are 10th on the team in three-point percentage. They are this in turnovers. Don't say they're a bad player. Don't say they don't, you just communicate objective things. And we like to use the phrase notifications. That's a really, really big piece of it. I think that's just a really big trap. I think we bring emotion, or we create motion by using words that attack the person instead of just really making judgments on what we're seeing about the player. I forgot what the second thing was. I just kind of lost my train of thought there. So, but that's the big thing, is just to share our observations. I would come back to the other trap. I know what I was going to say is when we talk about playing time, we probably focus a little bit too much on that character aspect. Okay. And I've been talking about character, obviously, for the majority of this podcast, but we talk about really being clear that there's kind of two thresholds in a program. You have to maintain a certain minimum standard of attitude and work ethic to be a part of our program. In practice, we'll ask you to step out of the drill or potentially the entire practice if you don't maintain that effort or that attitude. Okay, so there's that minimum standard, there's that minimum threshold to be a part of the program. You have to meet that criteria. But after that, it's about who gives us the best chance to win. And you need to be really clear on that. And I think coaches talk too much about the character thing. Well, that's something you should be addressing already. That's something you should be holding your players to already. And so if you're not, that's kind of on you at this stage here. But if it obviously plays into the playing time, then they should, we can go too, I don't want to go too deep down that, but that's something, just don't put too much emphasis on character as far as the playing time equation.
Yeah, I like that from a standpoint of almost to the point where there's a baseline requirement of, look, everybody who's part of our program is already meeting this, what hopefully is a very high standard of performance in terms of effort and attitude and all those things. And sure, is there going to be a variance above and beyond that? Absolutely. We all know that there is. But anybody who's a part of our team is already at this standard that we believe is necessary for us to be able to have success. And so then I like the idea of making your decision in terms of playing time and having those conversations with players and with parents. I like the idea of having it be more objective as opposed to subjective. And then let me ask your opinion on a couple things that I know there are coaches out there that do this, and that is when you're thinking about having your players, judging them and figuring out who's going to play, would you be in favor of, because I know this has been something that I've been talking to coaches about, in terms of, let's say, charting shots during practice or keeping track of, you put every time there's a competitive drill in practice, whether it could be a small-sided game or a 5-on-5 scrimmage or a shooting contest or a conditioning drill or whatever, you keep track of wins and losses. Or I had another coach tell me that every day he had the kids pick teams, and a different kid 2 different kids were picked as captains each day, and then those kids picked who they wanted to be on their team during the practice. So whenever there was a situation where you had 2 teams, it was picked by, these 2 captains. It was a different kid every day. So every day, this coach had a list of people who were picked. And so now look, this kid's always consistently, he's the 15th pick every single day. That has to tell you something about the opinion that his teammates have of him. So just give me your thought about kind of collecting that objective data during practice and how that could potentially help a coach in a conversation with both a player and potentially a parent.
Yes, that's a great question. And we have 3 systems that we use to present objective data. Obviously, you can present game stats, but I always tell coaches, steer away from that, because every parent's going to go, well, I don't get a fair chance,
Right.
Like that's the argument. So the first thing that we use is what we call the competitive cauldron. We actually have an Excel file that we've created and coded for coaches that I work with, that it charts wins and losses, a win-loss percentage. It becomes a big part. In some of our programs, they have the staff and the resources and manpower at the collegiate and high school level to make this objective, right? Because you have to be intentional enough to make it objective, or else it can be too skewed. But when we make it objective, we obviously bring that win-loss percentage in there into that conversation. I've got coaches that share that with the players, obviously, on a weekly basis. There's a ranking posted in the locker room, or maybe they have a chart, or maybe they send out a group text. And I've even heard of coaches putting in an email. I know Anson Dorrance, North Carolina women's soccer coach, he shares his competitive cauldron rankings with parents, I believe, freely. So there's that one. The other system that we use is the commitment tracking system, which we have, which is probably less popular because it takes a lot more work. But we essentially have players track certain commitments that they make as a program to be excellent, to greatness, right? They're the thing that are exceptional. So this could be staying after practice for 15 minutes. This could be texting a teammate during the week, letting them know something they did well. Like, there's just a variety of things that help to embody our core values, and the team reviews those things. It's similar to a little bit of James Clear's habit tracking. And if you've read Brett Ledbetter's book, What Drives Winning, he does the commitment cards. It's something similar to that. But we're able to have numbers on that through another Excel file. And then the last thing that we really, have started to share is the peer assessments, those rankings of where they see themselves, whether their standards or their core values, And we've had coaches just say, hey, rank your teammates based upon who's a great teammate. Rank them based upon who's a good athlete, or who's a good player, and just having them rank that. And that's been, I say that I haven't seen coaches share that information with people outside the player, but it's obviously something you could bring into the parent conversation as well.
So when you do that when you collect that data from players and you ask them for their opinion on who's the best player, who's the most selfless player, who's the most selfish player, who's the most the teammate who best embodies our culture, when you get that information, I would assume then that lends itself to having a meeting with probably the whole team, and then B, probably, again, that's something you could talk about with some of the individual player conversations that we talked about off the top of the show. So I would think that one of the things and this is something that I think is underrated in terms of being a good coach, and I think something that a coach has to be able to do is you have to be able to have what many people would term to be difficult conversations, where you have to confront the truth and tell the truth with, again, could be administration, could be players, could be parents, anybody involved with your program. So can you maybe just talk about the need for a coach to develop that ability to have difficult conversations, and how important you think that is?
Yeah, I think we avoid the difficult conversations because, one is, as a culture, and I think we're all part of this, the culture of positivity, we feel like that means that we can't give them truth. We're worried about hurting kids' self-esteem, We're too caught up in trying to give kids self-esteem, which you can't give anybody self-esteem. They've got to earn it and develop it through their hard work. I think we're a little bit, and that I also think we're worried about, the conflict that comes through this. I think we avoid conflict. I think this is why we avoid those hard conversations. We obviously I sit back and I encourage coaches, hey, you got to step in, you got to lean on those conversations. But we have some systems in place to create these conversations more often than not. And one of those systems that we use a lot is we have coaches send out a Google form the day before a game, at least 24 to 36 hours, maybe on the day of the practice, the day before a game. How many minutes do you think you're going to play tomorrow, and what's your role? And then we take that number of minutes, and obviously it's always over the number of minutes that you can actually have. I've only had one team ever come within 10, and they were a dominant top 6. I mean, it was from 6 down after that. They had the same rotation every game, right? So it's pretty simple from that standpoint. But everybody else is always off. I mean, we're talking even like 3/4 of the way in the year. Kids still, for some reason, have this expectation they're going to play more than they're going to get. So you get that number and that role. And if you think your kid's going to play 10, or he's not going to play at all, and they've got themselves at 20, 30 minutes, or that, if that doesn't match up, you have to have the conversation as soon as possible, because you don't want to have that conversation or have to deal with that emotion in the game, because your job is the coach. You don't want your bench to be disruptive. And so that, that's first off. And secondly, that kid, he deserves that to have to know, they do. These kids, they deserve. This is one of the biggest frustrations, to try to criticize us as coaches for a second. Parents' feedback and player feedback, when I first come into a program, when I come in there and do some consulting and mentoring with the program, every time it's playing time, but we don't understand. We don't know how. There's a lack of transparency. And so being more transparent, having these conversations, it's the only way we're going to grow things from it. If we continue to ignore it, it's just going to keep to bite us, bite us in the back.
I agree with that. I think one of the things that came across, or that I was thinking about while you were talking, is just the fact that if you're going to be transparent, it helps you in all aspects of it. And I think a lot of times it goes back to coaches get so caught up in the day-to-day operations of our teams and our programs and practice planning and figuring out how we're going to win this game and looking at film and doing all these things, that sometimes we're so deep into it and we're so dialed into all the things that we know are important, the things that we use to determine playing time. We're with those kids every day in practice. And for some reason, I think that coaches sometimes let it slip because they just think that everybody else knows the same thing that they do, even though we're not communicating it, we're not necessarily sharing it, but we're so deep into it in our own mind that sometimes we just forget that everybody else around us doesn't have the same information that we do, and they're not in our head, they're not in our brain, they can't hear our thoughts. And so we have to really put those words out there for people to hear, or we have to put them on paper so people can see them, so that we can have the kind of transparency that's required, so that when those conversations come up, people understand why the decision is being made. And I think that that's one of the biggest frustrations that I've always heard from, whether it's parents or players, is I'm not playing, but I just don't understand why. And of course, many coaches, I think a standard answer in the past was, well, my door's always open to come in and, especially from a player standpoint, come in and talk to me. But we all know, especially if you're dealing with middle school kids or high school kids or even college players, there's some hesitancy to come in and have a conversation with a coach sometimes about playing time. And I think the more you can open those lines of communication and then be clear with people about what your expectation is and what you want them to do, I think you're heading off a ton of problems right off the gate, right off the bat.
You're right on the money there. The door is always open. Yeah, to the coach that's running around from practice to class and all, we're hard to get a hold of sometimes, right?
Yeah, right.
We it's not a good enough policy. It's not a good enough process. Why? Because it's not working. That's why. If you have problems with your players and their frustration around playing time, then your process, your system in place there is not working currently. So we've got to make adjustments to make it work. And that's why we're so intentional about helping to create these conversations, whether it be using the Google Forms or making sure you sit down with them every 2 weeks. It's why I encourage coaches to explain how they determine playing time to the parents and then say, if you don't understand, you can contact me. You won't agree with me this year, especially if your kid's not playing a lot. You're not going to agree with me. But if you don't understand, then I'm willing to have that conversation. And it's kind of, this conversation brings it back to the third most important question you can ask parents, or the part of that conversation with parents. And also one of the most powerful things you can ask players after you have that kind of conversation with them around that, where they have this unrealistic expectation of their playing time. The question is, how can I currently support you in the role that you're going to be serving in this team? How can I help you in this? And that's a real important question. How can I, and for the parents, it's how can we, because his role isn't changing today. This conversation is not changing what the role is, but we can make adjustments in the way that we support them and help them to feel valued, because we want our players to feel valued regardless of how many minutes they're getting. That's really hard, though. That's really hard for us to understand as an athlete, because the currency of sports is playing time in so many ways. And so if one person is getting all this playing time and we're getting none, we can obviously assume that we're not as valued as much.
Coaches, we've teamed up with Coach Tyler Whitcomb so you can now purchase his exclusive new playbooks right from the Hoopheads Pod website. If you're looking for ways to improve your team next season, these playbooks blend affordability with the quality content that serious coaches are looking for. Just visit hoopheadspod.com/store and you'll find playbooks from John Calipari of Kentucky, Leonard Hamilton from Florida State, and Mike Young of Virginia Tech. Check out these great resources at hoopheadspod.com/store. All right, so give me one. I know you have a bunch of things that you could probably share about how to value your reserves. Just give me one thing a coach could do to value their reserves. And then I got one final fun question. I know we're coming up on about an hour here, so I want to be respectful of your time. But let's answer that. Talk about one thing coaches can do to value their reserves. And then I want to ask one kind of final fun question to wrap things up.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my favorites because it's different. Obviously there's the stories of coaches and these big moments. You win the championship, the coach, first guy he acknowledges is the guy on the bench, right? There's obviously those things, those cliches, which are, that happen and they're impactful. But I would say one of the coolest things you can do, and also from a practical standpoint, because support isn't just from you, it comes from their teammates. So the day before the game, get your team into units. Now we use units a lot, small groups of 3 to 4 players that each have a captain leading each of those. It's part of our captain's council system. But when we are always having what we call culture conversations before practice, after practice. Sometimes it's 60 seconds, maybe it's 3 minutes, but it's an opportunity for them to connect on something and discuss. Well, one of the best ones you can do the day before a game is every guy goes around and explains their role. Or every girl goes around and explains their role. This is my role for tomorrow. I'm going to be the starting point guard, or I'm going to be the backup point guard, or I'm probably not going to play a significant minute. That's the first thing. What is their role? So I have to cheer my teammates on. The second question is, what's the best part about that role? What do I enjoy about that role? And so the starting point guard can be like, man, it's awesome. It's awesome to be in charge, to be leading, to break the press or whatever it is. The reserve will have a harder time sometimes with this question. They may say, well, I love exciting games. Love cheering my teammates on, whatever. The next question is they have to share is what's going to be the hardest thing about that. That starting point guard might be they've got the best press in the state, and I'm really afraid of turning the ball over. And your reserve might be like, well, it's just I haven't played in 5 games, and it's just sometimes it's hard to keep my energy up. What does this do? Well, it does a couple of things. One is it gets your starters, your big-time players to stop, reflect, and empathize with those players that aren't playing as much, because they need to show that those other kids, that they care about them. That's what's really important to those kids, is that they belong to something. They feel like they belong. But for the other aspect is, it gives you insight into being a starter or being the star isn't it's all it cracked up to be. Your star may feel like they have to score 25 points a game or for you guys to have a chance to win, and sometimes that's the case in high school, right? Or that point guard, he's got to break the press or else you're done for. He's that's stressful. So it's giving them an insight into just some of the stresses and pressures of being a starter.
I love it. That is a fantastic activity, and I hope coaches that are part of the audience, I would incorporate that immediately, JP. I love it. I want to finish up with this question about the onboarding procedure and talking about first day activities that can get your team connected right out of the gate, and that's kind of where we'll finish up. So if you could just talk a little bit about some things that coaches can do on the first day of practice to connect their team. The first day the team gets together, that could be in the fall, that could be first day of practice, official practice. Just give us an idea of what some of those activities are that you recommend teams do on day one to make that first day experience special for their team.
Absolutely. It's a great one because moments stick with us. Moments matter. There's a great book out there by Chip and Dan Heath called The Power of Moments. They go into the science, the research around how we don't remember our experiences, like for instance a high school basketball experience, with the cumulative average of our moments, but we remember peak moments, the top moments, we remember the really, really bad ones. And typically, new beginnings, like the first day of practice, the first day you show up for summer sessions, the last day, right, their last game at home, these really stick with people, especially if we capitalize on them. So you want that first day experience to be significant. And so one of the best things you can do is you can take your returning players and you can pull them all aside. You could say, all right, we got some freshmen coming in tomorrow, or we got new people coming up to the varsity. What did it feel like? What did it feel like on your first day? Like, what were you thinking the night before? And typically they're going to be pretty honest and say, well, I was kind of nervous, that, and, I wanted to prove myself and that. Okay, what do we want it to feel like? What do we want it to feel like for those people that are coming in? And get them to reflect on that. And they're going to say, well, we want them to feel, happy. They want them, know they're a part of the team, right? They're going to give you those type of responses. You say, okay, what can you all do to help create that experience for them? And, you let them mull that over. And they won't probably throw this out there. We say, all right, what I'm suggest is I'm going to buddy you up. And you're going to each have a buddy or two that you're going to be in charge of. And what are some things that you could do to make them feel welcome? Okay, and it could be sending them a text the night before, or a Snapchat or whatever it be. When they come in the front door, they know what they look like. They come over, hey, you're shooting with me. You're my partner, right? So you come up with some ways to shape that environment. So the first time that kid walks in, they're already confident because they've already got that Snapchat from their buddy saying, hey, can't wait to see you tomorrow. They come in there, they walk to the door. Hey, come on, you're with me. And then you start doing some sort of warm-up or just get up shots. You introduce themselves, right? And then maybe at the end of practice, you post a picture of the two of them or the three of them in that group, and you put it on social media because the kids will love that. And instantly, and with a tweet of, so happy to have this individual part of the program, right? That type of stuff. Instantly, you're sending signals of belonging. You're creating that culture that you want to have, and you're implanting it right into their brain. It can create a great experience from the get-go. What it also does is it gets your older players to think about what do we want this to feel like playing for this program, and how are we going to create that for other people, because that's what it's about. It's not about how do I get that experience for myself, it's about how do I create that experience for other people, and you're starting to consistently put them into that mindset.
I love it. That's fantastic. I think that tonight we've had so many solid takeaways, actionable things that coaches could do after listening to the podcast and hearing you speak. I just think there's so many things that are practical, that are easy to implement. I shouldn't say easy. Easy is maybe the wrong term, but things that you can take and that you can put into your program almost immediately by being intentional about what you're doing. And I think if you do that, you're going to ultimately have more success and be able to have more impact on kids. And to me, that's what it's all about. So, JP, I want to give you a chance to share how people can get in touch with you. How can they find you on social media? How can they reach out to you? And then if there's any final point that you want to make before we finish up, you can do that. And then I'll jump back in and wrap up the episode.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. People can find me on Twitter at JP Nerbun, Nerbun, or at my website, thriveonchallenge.com. My website has a lot of free stuff, a lot of articles and stuff if you want to go through that. If you want more, you want to go even beyond that, my book, Calling Up, Discovering Your Journey to Transformational Leadership. You can get that at Amazon or any of those online stores at this stage. So those are two things. If you're really, really serious about turning your culture around, about really growing as a coach, then you can reach out to me through the website to schedule a call, and we can connect, talk about your program and how through my mentoring and my consulting work, how we can really start to turn things around for you. So I'm excited to connect with coaches that are really want to take that leap as well. But like I said, there's a lot of free stuff out there too. For the other coaches as well. So
fantastic, JP. It's been a pleasure getting a chance to talk to you and learning more about all the great things that you're doing for coaches to try to ultimately make their lives better, easier, and which ultimately trickles down to impact the athletes that coaches are serving. So we can't thank you enough for spending an hour and 15 minutes or so with here today. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. Registration is now open at headstartbasketball.com for this summer's Head Start basketball camps. We'll be hosting camps for boys and girls in grades 1 through 6 throughout the greater Cleveland area. Get registered today and make sure you hit the courts with us this summer. Hey everyone, last year at the Junior NBA Summit, I came across an amazing company called iSport360 and its founder, Ian Goldberg. Their youth sports app gets coaches, players, and parents on the same page. Your team can set goals, share player feedback, training videos, sticker rewards, player evals, and practice assignments. All of this to foster a healthy team communication and culture. If your team or club struggles to keep open lines of communication, especially among teen parents, iSport360 can help. If you want to empower your athletes to have more success, more confidence, and more communication with their teammates, give iSport360 a try today. Shoot me an email, mike@hoopheadspod.com, or give me a call at 216-392-4059 to learn more. Being without basketball right now is tough for all of us, so we've partnered with Pro Skills Basketball to offer you a 50% discount on their ultimate shooting guide and video program that will put players on a guided path to becoming the best shooter they can be. With 1 year's worth of workouts that includes games, drills, and competitions, players will gain access to a blueprint showing them what it takes to become an elite level shooter. If you're looking to improve your shooting at home, this program can help. Visit hoopheadspod.com/store to check it out.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.